Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second episode of our podcast series. And I'm really happy to do this today because in today's episode, we have a very unique talent with us, Lasya Pemaraju. And this is the visual example of beauty with brains. Hi, Lasya. Hi. Uh, Hi everyone, I'm Lasya Pramaraju. I am a legal counsel, data protection officer, and a privacy consultant. And today I am hopefully able to give you an insight into my journey of getting here as a legal counsel. And hopefully I'm also able to talk to you about giving you a little bit of advice on what career path to choose or how you should be deciding what to take up in your career. That's really great, Lasya. Now, moving on to the questions, your academic journey isn't a straight A fairy tale, and I really love that. So, how did you mentally separate from, but I still need to compete with the best law minds in the world, to marks don't define me? I think this is a great question. So, in today's world, it's very easy to go down the path of marks are how we can judge who we are, or marks are what defines our future. But that is absolutely not true. Thankfully, I've had the right parental support too from a very early point in my life where I was constantly told that marks are not what matters. What really matters in life are a good combination of soft skill and hard skills. And I think all of us do notice social dynamics growing up, social structures growing up. I would say I wasn't just interested in it. I got to a point where I was obsessed with it. I really like studying how a room works. I really like studying how a social dynamic works. So that really propelled me into my passion for law as well. Because law, essentially, if you break it down to its most rudimentary bricks, it's just a study of social order or how you would, implement a social order. So I think that's what really pushed me, and this is what really matters, right? So I wouldn't say this is the fundamental way of competing with minds that are very legally driven or anything, but this goes for everybody. You just need to find what makes you passionate in life and see, well, how can I earn out of it? So you were never really in the race. You always aim to win. It was definitely. I am a complete believer of the fact that you're only in a race with yourself, not with anybody else around you. Oh, great. So, most law students argue cases. You worked with the Indian police on intermediary liability and privacy breaches. Was there a moment when you thought, okay, now this isn't just an internship, but this is the real part? Definitely. So, as you mentioned, internship, I think when it comes to being a law student, this is something that you really seek out. You seek out the right internships. Like I've just mentioned at the start of this, until you get to the point of starting a career, what's most important about all of this is finding the right guidance and right mentorship, right? And this is exactly what internships are meant for. As a law student, you're supposed to finish 10 internships before you get your degree. It's kind of the standard everywhere in this country. So within those 10 internships, I had to make sure that I landed in the right place with somebody that I had the right mindset alignment with, but also somebody that I had confidence in that they would mentor me and guide me and push me to the right direction. And in this one particular internship, it was an IPR internship, and I was just figuring out which field of law should I be going into. And IPR being something that's very innovation driven, somebody who could resonate with innovation or somebody who could resonate with what exactly is humanity doing is definitely somebody who would enjoy getting into IPR. So when I got into this internship, I think more than IPR, my mentor noticed that I was really gravitating towards cyber law. And that's essentially because my dad has been in IT and he's an ethical hacker himself. So going up under the table conversations were constantly about how the internet works and how the technology works and everything, or where technology is headed. So naturally, every time I'd hear in the office, in the law firm, something that's related to cyber law, I would automatically pick up on it. And this gave me an opportunity to get into Cyberabad Police and helping and guiding them through multiple cases, actually. I was able to guide them on how to implement law from a prosecutor point of view, because usually when it comes to crimes or cyber crimes or so on, people tend to look at it from a defense point of view, which is how you can practice law.
But this time I had to look at it from a prosecutor point of view, which I think makes a world of difference when you're just a second year law student to get that kind of impactful experience.
So, mentorship is the key for success.
Absolutely. Mentorship is the key to success.
Nice. So, you're trained in ethical hacking and law. So, tell me, if a hacker and a lawyer were arguing inside your head, who usually wins and who scares the other more?
Very interesting question. Both, when it comes to mindsets, this is how you need to look at this as well. A hacker has a completely different mindset than a lawyer would. A lawyer, when you look at it from the face value of it, is somebody who wants to see how you can do things by the book, or make sure that things are done by the book, especially if you're somebody who's limited to maybe being an in-house counsel or so on. But on the other hand, when it comes to a hacker, it is all about finding loopholes in things or trying to exploit vulnerabilities that exist within systems. So it is a lethal combination, I would say, to get knowledge in both ethical hacking and having legal knowledge as a lawyer who practices technology law. What it essentially means is that while you know how to do things by the book, you know how to get things done in other ways as well, or essentially how do you satisfy the requirements of social order, i.e. Regulatory compliance. So this is how I look at it.
So, you were always in a war when it came to studies. A war? I was like, oh, ethical hacker and a lawyer, like law will always be something different, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say war. I'd just say you can honestly make any two mindsets work if you want to. And I was just somebody who was always legally inclined. I have a brain that works in a very mechanical sense. I tend to look at things in a very black and white way. So when it comes to being driven that way, I felt like we need to find some middle ground. We need to ensure that there is another supplementary part to this industry as well that I can basically bring into my knowledge. And that's when I started seeking out knowledge in like cybersecurity. What we usually don't realize is when it comes to things like HR or law, these are great career options, right? Because there are a lot of opportunities. But at the end of the day, both of these, while they are industries by themselves, as in there are law firms or there are HR consultancy firms, so therefore they are industries by themselves. But at the end of the day, when it comes to other industries, if I were in an IT company, what is law to me as somebody who's a developer? That's just a support function. What is law to me as somebody who's a business head? That's just a support function. It's an operation that is helping me function. So just having legal knowledge is not good enough. You need to have knowledge in another industry as well that you're passionate in, so that you can combine both of them and see how you could help a business grow.
Great. So, you worked on deepfakes at the Indo-Dutch cybersecurity school. Am I right?
Yeah, I think it was more of combating deepfakes. Yeah.
So, deepfakes can spread fake news and false identities very easily. Do you think laws can keep up with this technology, or are they always one step behind?
Back when I did my at cybersecurity school, maybe there was a chance. But I think right now we're already at a post-implementation phase, right? There's actually a legal term for this. It's called Coleridge dilemma. It's where technology moves faster than regulatory implications can catch up, or rather, technology moves faster than the law. So that's pretty much the scenario that we're in right now already. Back when I did that cybersecurity school, it was 2022, and AI was just coming up. It was very much in its nascent stage. Today, general purpose AI is something that we have in all of our devices, something that we use every day to create content, to create questions, to create answers, to create videos. It's everywhere. So I think we're pretty much living in a world right now that is surrounded by deepfakes. Deepfakes are our reality right now. So the way in which we could combat it now, I would say, I think it very much is time for India to come up with a regulatory angle there, for India to come up with a rule or a law. EU is actually very much in forward with this. There's already the EU AI Act, which mandates things like labeling content that is AI so that a human user could understand that it is AI. But at the end of the day, when it comes to India, I think we're very much lagging behind. And even in a political sense, I see that it could put us in danger if the state doesn't move fast in creating laws.
So, do you think AI is dangerous?
I think there's two sides to everything. Everything can be looked at in a negative way or a positive way if possible. AI at the end of the day is as good as a gun, I would say. The moment somebody creates a gun in this world, it means that everybody needs to now start having guns or start manufacturing guns, because that person who has the gun is the one who's the most powerful. Therefore, if I were to use that in a metaphorical sense here as well, the moment somebody comes up with such innovative technology, you can't be the person who says this is dangerous, this is taboo, so I'm going to stay away from it. You should be essentially on par with that person. You should start utilizing this technology as well. AI is just a tool. At the end of the day, it can help you create just as much as it can harm you. The way in which you look at it differs, and in a society sense, of course, there's always people who utilize tools in a negative way, which is why social order is important, therefore law.
Understandable. So, everyone sees Trinity College Dublin as prestigious.
Yeah.
But once you landed in Ireland in 2023, what was the hardest truth no brochure prepared you for?
It was honestly surreal when I landed in Ireland. That was the first time ever that I've stepped out of this country and by myself, because I did not go with my parents. So it felt insane to me just landing in another country surrounded by people who don't really look like me. Or the language that I speak is also now coming up very naturally, because when you are in India, English is something that you'd only communicate with somebody if you don't speak their language, right? But there it's your only mode of communication. So very quickly I started missing Telugu. And then soon after that, I think when I entered the college, something that nobody could prepare me for was how much I felt at home. So earlier whenever I stepped into an institution or a new space, it's just human tendency, right? You start looking around and you're like, oh, I don't know where I'm going, or where's my classroom? How do I head there, or so on. But the first time when I actually stepped into Trinity, I immediately video called my mom and I told her this. I was like, I'm going to now walk around in the campus, but I'm not going to feel lost, or I'm not going to look lost. I'm going to enjoy the fact that I don't know where the hell I'm going. I'm going to enjoy the fact that all these roads that I'm walking, I don't know where it's going or where I'm going. It's a huge, vast campus. So the whole time that I was walking, I told myself, today is the only day you'll feel lost on this campus. From tomorrow onwards, when you go into your classroom, you know the route. On the third day, you'll know the library. On the fourth day, you'll know where to sit and have lunch. But this is the first day, is the only day where you don't really know where you're going. And I told myself, like, you gotta enjoy this. And I did. And that was a very new experience for me. And nobody could have prepared me for that, honestly.
You look so cheerful talking. Yeah, so 10 years from now, when data is more valuable than oil and privacy is a luxury, do you see yourself protecting the system, rewriting the rules, or breaking them first so you can fix them legally?
I think we are already in a stage where data is more valuable than oil. Data has become a luxury today. Owning your data, I'd say rather. The reason for that being that, let's take something as simple as WhatsApp or Instagram, for example. We're using them for free every day, right? But do we ever question ourselves, how are we getting these services for free? Let's say Instagram, let's assume that it's run by ad revenue, right? But WhatsApp, do we see ads on WhatsApp? No. But how is it that we're getting it for free? Have we ever questioned ourselves that? Today, we are selling our data every day without really knowing. You either pay money to keep your data, or you give away your data as a, let's say, as a substitution from what you would give money for otherwise. So at the end of the day, data is more valuable today, and it is a huge industry, an industry that I can't even really put a value to, because I would definitely be underestimating the value. So I think in a world like that today, we really have to go with the flow, especially from a regulatory point of view as well. To get to a point to even understand whether I should be breaking rules or whether I should be, going with what's already there. I think we haven't even reached a saturation point with data yet. something as simple as the Cambridge Analytica scandal that happened a few years ago. That's only one of those cases that came out, right? But I'm sure Cambridge Analytica is a living reality for all of us today. We just don't know that we are under mass surveillance. So without getting into the paranoia side of it, I think it's important that every single one of us um, cautiously and consciously look at where we are giving away our data without knowing. Something as simple as just stepping into a movie theater, you are given a card and you're asked to write your name and your phone number so you'd get like some offer or whatever. That's like the most rudimentary example that I can give you for how data is harvested from people. This is in a physical sense. But every single day, data is harvested from all of us, and it really powers today's economy. So I think we just have to be cautious rather than looking at should we break rules or should we be warriors. Leave that to people who have to like actually regulate it. But individually, all of us have to really protect our interests today.
This answer of yours made me connect to the answer you said, like when a gun comes in the, oh yeah, people usually try to take a gun for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So is data something like that only that people are scared about?
Data protection, no, but using data, yes. Once some part of the world realizes that data is an asset and it is something that you can essentially use as currency, or you can use it to power systems, it just means that the whole world has to get on board with it or you're lagging behind. So yeah.
Understood. So, very few students think about returning back to India after a foreign education. They would stay at least until their post-study work permit expires. Were you always sure you wanted to return, or after going there, you felt India is better market to tap in with the skills that you acquired?
Before I even wanted to do my LLM, I had clarity that India is where I belong and this is where I want to work and also basically settle in. But I did have an open mind. It wasn't that I was going in that country thinking that without even allowing the possibility of having to work there. I think as soon as I went there, a few realities really hit, especially the FE1's reality that I'm sure a lot of Irish students are now seeing themselves. FE1s are essentially the bar exam it's the Irish bar exam. It's where it's essentially licensed for you to practice as a lawyer. It's a very different situation than it is in India. In India, you don't need a license to be an in-house counsel or somebody who gives legal advice in a general sense. You only need a license if you want to be a law practitioner. Now the terminology has changed, but essentially an advocate is what we call it in a very long time. So as soon as I went to Ireland, I knew that I had to crack FE1s, which would take me 2 or 3 years, and then to land a trainee contract and then work as an associate at a law firm and all of that. I think the whole thing would have taken me maybe 5 or 6 years. So it's a very large commitment apart from just doing my education there. So I was like, I'm not ready to stay in another country for another 7 years, because if I was going to prepare for an exam for 2 or 3 years, I better work for like another 2 or 3 years at the very least, right? So I was like 6 or 7 years staying in another country. I wasn't really ready for it. So I got back.
So you were homesick also? Like
homesick? Yeah, definitely. I did get homesick a couple of times, but I told myself that I wouldn't even take a break or a vacation and go back home until I finished my education, because I knew out of experience, even during my bachelor's, I had this experience where you're fine as long as you stay there. But once you come back home, that is where you start struggling to go back there again. So I knew that if I was going to do my education there, I had to like do it like a studious marathon where I finish it until the end and then I get back home.
So you were there for straight one and a half.
Yeah, without really coming back.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now. So when I was researching for the podcast, I spoke with our counselors to know about you a lot, to ask you the right questions. So, and everybody had a smile while talking about you. Okay. They said you were very talented and smart, kind of a grade A applicant. So, my question is, in this 1.5 year of your exposure to Ireland, what were the evolutions in this talent or qualities of your that got improved?
Hmm. I think, like I mentioned already, it's a combination of soft skills and hard skills that you have to learn to grow or go anywhere in life. And the whole time that I lived in Ireland, I would say I had a faint idea of how it was going to be difficult for me, but I didn't know how difficult managing a house by yourself or managing your finances, networking with people that you absolutely have nothing in common with would go. So these were very new to me. And I think in that area, it was really like I was upgrading my skill set. How to talk to people, how to network with them, how to reach a common ground and make friends with people that you don't have a lot of common ideologies with, or even any common interests with. And how do you manage a home? How do you go to college but also take care of the dishes at the same time? Simple questions like that to maybe just how do you live a life away from your support system? Because the place where you live in for like a very long time, especially when you're a student who has gone abroad, you're essentially leaving your entire life and starting a new life, even if it's temporary, right? So, building a new support system from scratch, or how do you basically rely on the support system that you have back home, or think positively in that sense? These are all questions that you only face when you live away from the life that you've built back home. So, yeah.
You were always like, you had the mindset of going to abroad and studying for it, or you just started to build it up when you were studying for your bachelor's?
I didn't have like a hard idea or like a mindset set towards it growing up. It was something that I was definitely inclined towards, I'd say. That as soon as I was done with my bachelor's, that I'd do my master's abroad. But what really solidified it for me was in my fourth year, during my internships, I discovered that when it comes to data protection, which is the area in which I practice, I knew that I can't just study the bills and the drafts of the bills here in this country, because at that point, the act hasn't passed yet in India. I knew that I had to study the root of where those laws came from. And essentially, I think most people would agree that GDPR is the mother of data protection laws all across the globe. And GDPR is General Data Protection Regulation, which is a data protection law in Europe or EU specifically. So I knew that this was my entry point for learning European law, or learning data protection law rather through European law. So it just felt like it was all working together. I knew that I wanted to go abroad, and I also knew that to study a law that is in India, I have a great opportunity to study the root of where it came from, or what this law is based off of or closely resembles. So I knew that studying GDPR was the way to study data protection. It's the entry point for data protection law. So it just felt like everything was working out conveniently. So yeah, that's why I wanted to go do my master's.
So you took two different paths and connected them together to build a career out of it, right?
Yeah, sure. You could say that, yeah.
So, like, according to the answer you gave right now, so you've done a lot of research to get into this career, right? So, basically, two paths you took and made it one career out of it. So, like, I would like to ask, like, the students are getting graduated now who are in third or fourth year. Do you think they should just go with the trend like a MA or LLM after a LMB? Or do you think they should research for the careers which are like booming right now and will have a lot of employment in the future? So, should they research about it or should they go with the trend?
Yeah, so the question itself has an answer in it. The fact that we're calling it a trend means that it's a trend, meaning it's fleeting, right? So it is quite important that any decision that you take, career-wise or education-wise, needs to be rooted in a lot of research, definitely. But more so when it comes to doing an LLM or an MA after you're done with your LLB, they could look like traditional routes, but you could most definitely build a career out of your basic education, like your bachelor's, which is LLB in this case. There's also an interesting way of picking your career where you could either pick a BA LLB or a BBA LLB. There's BTech LLB now, there's a BSc LLB. And that itself forms the foundation of where exactly you want to go in your career. For example, if you're somebody like me who's interested in technology law, then a BTech LLB looks great, right? Because you would be studying technology and law at the same time. I did my BBA LLB because there are not a lot of options in 2018, but it has gotten a lot better now. But you could take traditional routes of education, like doing your LLM after you're done with your LLB. If you want to build on top of the expertise and network that you have. And this is what it brings in. At the end of the day, a lot of people have the misconception that doing your master's will give you a lot of knowledge. No, you could acquire a lot of knowledge even without pursuing a master's. And you're not spending that much money for the sake of knowledge. Knowledge is available everywhere around us. This is not the way you get knowledge. What you do get out of doing masters is a good amount of expertise, meaning you hone your skills in the area in which you already have knowledge in, or the area in which you're actively building your knowledge. Second of all, the most important part of all of this is getting access to resources and people. When you go and do your masters, you meet a lot of people. And while you could get nervous and you're maybe busy figuring out whether this is somebody that I should really gel well with, whether this is somebody that I should add to my network and so on. That's not the time and place to think about whether you want to add somebody to your network. Add as many people as you can to your network. This is the time and place at which you really build your network. So there are many ways to go about it, but if you are going to do your masters, don't be blinded by maybe like you just mentioned, trends, or I'm doing this because everybody's doing an MBA now, I'm going to do this because everybody's doing an LLM now. Not like that. Have some vision, have a direction in what is the reason why you want to do this. Is it because you want exposure to books? Is it because you want exposure to libraries or people or knowledge, what it is that you want? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lasya. That was really inspiring and motivating. I hope as much as I'm inspired and motivated, our audience are too. So as for our audience, if you really liked it, do like, share and subscribe to Dollar Dreams. We will bring in more inspiring and motivating stories like Lasya to you for sure.